All right, late night update. We got our audio fixed and we are ready to rock. The Iranian military is on its highest state of alert and combat readiness in anticipation of what it believes is going to be the inevitable spread of this conflict to the region at large. That's a quote by the Iranian defense minister. Now, as you can see behind me here, they are brandishing their new hypersonic missile suite, which some people is going to be a game changer, a possible deterrent even. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We have a fighting pause, a truce. Some people are calling it a temporary ceasefire, an armistice, currently or about to be underway in Israel and the Gaza Strip. Now, the real reason for this, I do believe, is to prevent the ouster of Netanyahu, prevent an insurrection by his own people who've been beating down his door to get some results and resolution on this hostage situation. So I still stand by my prediction that once they get the women and children back, once they get all of the more vulnerable people in this hostage situation back into Israel, that's when they're more likely to execute what's called the Hannibal Doctrine, which is basically getting the job done irrespective of civilian casualties, even if those civilian casualties happen to be on your side. This is also going to allow the Netanyahu government to refocus their efforts temporarily towards the north with Lebanon, Syria, and possibly the Yemeni. Some people say this is going to allow those conflicts to cool down, but we still don't know who is the primary instigator in this conflict. Is it Israel trying to pull the United States into a war, or is it in fact Iran and its proxies who are orchestrating all of this in order to goad the United States and Israel into a war with the help of the Russians to collapse the U.S. empire and the Zionist, whatever you want to call it, empire, and put an end to that so that, they can get on with taking over the world. I'm talking about the Axis countries. More on that in just a moment. Zelensky says the quiet part out loud today. He says that, and this is the thing that you probably shouldn't say when you're on the ass end of World War III, okay? He said that killing Putin is not only in the cards, but it is part of the agenda, that it is part of the plan. Again, probably not something you should say. Most people might say, well, of course the leaders who are fighting each other in a war want to take each other out, but that's not how this works, okay? There's levels to this, for which we'll explain in just a moment. We have the Wagner organization, who is an extension of the Russian government, of course, partnering with the Iranian proxy groups, namely Hezbollah, in their delivery of some Pantsir missile defense systems that some people think could be a game changer in the conflict and has Israel quite concerned. We have the BRICS emergency meeting with Vladimir Putin and friends, yielding very little results, pretty much just a bunch of rhetoric and false promises that won't be realized, unfortunately. Is it demonstrating solidarity with those countries against Israel and the United States? Well, it's complicated. Russia isn't as anti-Israel as a lot of people realize, okay? It's a very complicated situation that, as usual, we'll talk about in just a minute. North Korea launches a satellite. Is this a satellite that is tipped with a nuclear warhead? That is the question. Of course, what they would do is they would put a nuclear warhead on a satellite. They would leave that up there until World War III starts. They would detonate it over North America. It would wipe out a large part of the power grid. At least in theory, that's how a high altitude nuclear weapon is supposed to work, okay? We have the U.S. sending previously banned missiles under the INF Treaty back to the Asia Pacific. This is just one day after the so-called initiation of the rapprochement between the Chinese and the Americans, Biden, Xi Jinping hugging and walking around the courtyard merrily ever after. Well, apparently it's not going so well because the Chinese have also continued their record incursions into Taiwanese airspace. Day after day, dozens of military aircraft are flying into that airspace. So you can bet that neither side trusts one another, and they're just kind of playing along. The U.S. is blaming the Iranians for the Houthi commandeering of commercial vessel antics, and they're getting ready to redesignate the Houthis as a terrorist organization. What is that going to mean for the Iranians, and why haven't the Americans hit the Houthis yet? Well, there's a very simple explanation that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. We have the Ukrainians mobilizing every last able-bodied thing that walks, okay, in their attempts to die for NATO. The NATO that doesn't want to allow them into the alliance. How sad is that? Revolution 2.0 is coming to Ukraine. Mark my words. Unless NATO gets back in there, and this could be what they want. Maybe they do want the situation to calm down in the Middle East, but somebody else doesn't want that to happen. Mr. Vladimir Putin has entered the chat. Because understand that, well, we'll save that for just a minute. Russia commits to 3 more nuclear submarines with hypersonic Zircon and nuclear-tipped missiles. 3 more to their suite of 12 of this particular submarine. They actually have 66 submarines in their arsenal. These are the Yasin submarines. I'll show you a diagram in just a moment. These hypersonic missiles cannot be intercepted as far as we know, and that makes them a big problem as far as World War III is concerned. If you are like me and you live in the West, we have the Iranians attacking a U.S. base multiple times in the last 24 hours, as well as the U.S. firing back multiple times. It's becoming commonplace now. As I said before, Iran is showing off its hypersonic missiles. South Africa has closed its Israeli embassy and expelled the ambassador. We got wildfires blazing in Northern California, and I just have something to say about the reemergence of nuclear reactors, these new small-scale modular nuclear reactors that they're talking about, that they're going to put right beside various cities around the world. I believe these are going to be a big problem in World War III, okay? Now, I want to share just a little scene with you guys, all right? Now, I'm a Saskatchewan guy, so my brain can't comprehend this. This is the 405 freeway in Los Angeles. And apparently every time, you know, Thanksgiving comes around, or in the run-up to Thanksgiving weekend, this is what happens. This is what it looks like. Now, this is busy in the best of times. It's very congested all the time, but apparently this is even more congested than is typical. Now, imagine a mass evacuation situation from Los Angeles. Everybody, every one of the 10 million people in LA trying to get the hell out at a moment's notice. What are people going to do? What is their rote motor memory? Where is it going to take them to? It's going to take them to the freeway, what they believe in their mind to be the fastest way out of the city. Imagine the honking horns, the gridlock, the angry drivers, the road rage, the accidents, the emergency vehicles, and that's if there is no electromagnetic pulse that has fried half of these cars' circuitry, okay, or 1% or 30%, or whatever you believe. There's varying hypotheses of what actually happened with an EMP with most modern vehicles. Some people say it's 1%, some people say it's up to 30%. Anyways, if even in the best of scenarios, we're looking at a total gridlock, one of the simple principles to follow in this type of situation, and this is part of the reason why I don't live in a major city. As far as I know, there are alternate routes outside of LA, but because it's surrounded by mountains and deserty terrain, there isn't many, okay, as far as, you know, relative to the population. So you still are going to be limited by certain bottlenecks. But if you have to evacuate a city, remember this simple principle. The slowest way in the best of times is going to be the fastest way in the worst of times, okay? The slowest way in the best of times will be the fastest way in the worst of times. What do I mean by that? Well, when your knee-jerk reaction is to get on the on-ramp and get onto the freeway, before you do that, I would encourage you to think in your brain, what is the slowest way to get out of town? If I had to take the residential streets, the back roads, the back alleys, hell, the train tracks even, what would be the absolutely slowest way that I could get out of town? That's what you want to, that's the mindset you want to be in when everybody else is racing to the door at the same time. You want to be looking for that one open window. okay? Because 99% of people, they're just going to be acting on instinct. And they're going to be all racing for the freeway at the same time. We go over this in our urban survival strategies types videos, for which I have numerous, probably like a half dozen now, that I would encourage you to go and check out. But that just got me thinking about, you know, the current state of things. And yeah, I couldn't imagine living in a city that big. I hope they have a bug out plan. Now, while we're on the topic of vehicles, let's talk about oil, because this, and before we get into all the other stuff I mentioned, I want to talk about this because history repeats always. The Yom Kippur War, early 1970s, where all the Arab countries went to war with Israel. What happened? Okay, everything was peachy. 1950s, even during the Vietnam War, the price of oil was relatively stable under the $30 mark. And this is adjusted for inflation. Okay, keep that in mind. Now, it skyrockets after that war begins to $60 a barrel. Okay, unthinkable at that point in time. Then it moves sideways a little bit, and then boom! I believe this was maybe around the time of the Iranian situation. The Arabs put an embargo on the Israelis and basically the rest of the world, and that led to a massive spike in the price of oil. Now, will we see something like that happen again? We very likely, because the Saudis are for the most part aligned with or allied with the Americans, for the most part, for now anyways, we're likely not going to see a 1970s style embargo, but we might see a disruption in oil flows as a result of war breaking out in the region, which could resemble what has happened here to some extent or another. Now, if the Americans were to designate the Houthis as a terrorist organization, which would obligate, not necessitate, but would obligate them to go in and neutralize, possibly go to war with the Yemenis once again, start doing those drone bombs that, you know, we got accustomed to throughout the Obama administration, then it's very likely that they will respond. And now they have a much greater capability. What would they do in response? Well, they would commandeer even more vessels. They would target Saudi oil fields, okay? The Saudis who continuously shoot down the missiles that they are sending towards Israel. So it's not so simple. The Americans know this. The Americans know that if Joe Biden wants to get reelected, or the Democrats want to get reelected, I don't even really think if you're talking deep state stuff, I don't even think they care who gets elected at this point in time. Call me cynical about the political system in the United States and just in general nowadays, but I don't think they would care when it comes to global financial hegemony. I think that's beyond whoever is the puppet that they put up there to entertain the masses, okay? So they need to keep the price of oil down. They need to do this because that's the only way they can control inflation. Price of oil goes up, everything else goes up. Well, wages are going down and stagnating, okay, and the price of everything is exploding. Consumer spending is down, consumer debt is up, so they have to keep the price of shit down. They need disinflation. They need deflation, in fact, not just disinflation. They need the price of stuff to come down to match the little demand. Otherwise, the economy is, just going to go into what's called stagflation. And that's really, really bad. Almost even worse than hyperinflation. Because, I won't get into it, but so it's worse. Stagflation. That's what they want to avoid. Now, if this price of oil shoots up, then what that means is they need to raise interest rates. The banks become more insolvent, the banks start to collapse. The U.S. credit rating slides even further. The U.S. dollar goes into the crapper and shit hits the fan. So I think that the United States has a vested interest at this point in time in keeping the price of oil down. Now, knowing that, who has a vested interest in keeping the price of oil up? Well, it's probably the Russians. It's probably the Iranians, who are already sanctioned to high heaven, right? Who stands to benefit? Is it the Saudis that stand to benefit? Yeah, a little bit. They definitely stand to benefit by a higher price of oil. But consider this. Why has OPEC agreed to these cuts? in spite of everything that's going on, sure, the Saudis want to keep the price of oil at a relatively, profitable level, okay? We don't even know what the profit margins are. At least I don't know. I'm assuming they're not as good as what they were in the 1970s for the Saudis. Remember, that was the golden age for oil. That's when you just, what's his name? The guy who, tell you a little story about a man named Jeb. He shoots a thing and the oil splashes up. Those were the good old days. That's when it started to kind of taper off. But still, that was the low-hanging fruit days. Nowadays, the amount of oil that you get for 1 barrel invested, it's like, 1 barrel of oil will get you 2 barrels. It used to be 1 barrel of oil invested in energy would get you 100. Now it's much worse. So, what was I talking about? Geez, this is that happens when you go on tangents and you make these videos in the middle of the night. The price of oil. Yes, the price of oil. So the Saudis, this is what I was going to say. The Saudis, they have some leverage here. So they could open the spigots, okay? If this situation with Yemen gets bad, they could open the spigots and they could potentially cause the price of oil to level off. And this could be why the price of oil hasn't skyrocketed yet. Now, if the U.S. goes to war with the Houthis, the price of oil skyrockets, okay? It not skyrockets necessarily, but it's going to go up. And that's going to be really bad for the economy because during a recession, the price of oil is supposed to go down. And what we are going to see is what we've seen in the 1970s, and you're going to have cars lined up around the block, okay, of people scrambling to get whatever gasoline remains. So remember that the demand now is much higher than it was in the 1970s. Much higher. There's far more cars in spite of all the Tesla, crap. Still a lot of oil is used in other industrial purposes. So even if half of people were driving electric cars, we would still be utilizing a lot more oil by virtue of the fact that there's just more people consuming more stuff, okay? It's, there's a principle, it's like, what is it called again? It's a paradox whereby the more energy sources we find, the more energy sources we use. I'm going to be interviewing an energy expert next month, and he's going to break it all down, these conundrums that we find ourselves in as a species. Now, before I forget about this, we got a lot of stuff to talk about here, but we must talk about this. Nuclear power market size from 2022 to 2032. They are predicting that we are going to see more nuclear power plants like this in the near future. Small-scale, modular nuclear power plants. Now, this is great from the perspective of having an abundance of relatively cheap and reliable, constant energy, right? The problem is World War fucking III. There's the F-bomb for you guys. I know you've been missing them lately. Some of you don't like it, but hey, this is the end of the world, so who cares? Now, if you have all of these modular nuclear reactors in every city, this is essentially an attack vector for your adversaries. I once theorized that part of the reason why they were starting to shut down a lot of these nuclear plants in Europe was because they anticipated on the horizon there was going to be problems with Russia down the road, and that these things were just ticking time bombs. Because you got, even if the thing is entombed in this bomb-proof shell, you still have to deal with the spent fuel, which is not in a bomb-proof shell, typically. The spent fuel pools, okay? You still have to deal with having more fissionable materials out there in the world that can be used as a dirty bomb. All of these nuclear reactors are attack vectors, they're liabilities when a war breaks out. We're seeing that. The amount of discretion that has to be utilized by both sides in Ukraine, Russia, whether it was Chernobyl or the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, that is still a massive liability to date. This is exactly what we're seeing, okay? So I think that this is going to be a problem, one of those unforeseen circumstances. I don't think that the scaremongering about nuclear fuel, in spite of Fukushima, which still is a very big problem, a lot of people think, and for all we know, it's a much bigger problem than they're letting on. But I don't think that's what we have to worry about. I think we have to worry about conflict. The one potential protective factor here is that cheap, abundant energy might minimize the risk of conflict. Now, coincidentally, a subscriber sent me this link. Over the weekend, there was a nuclear power plant emergency shutdown at Entergy in north of Baton Rouge. It was forced into a temporary emergency shutdown. Now, was this a cyber attack? Who knows? It very well could have been, or it just could have been, as they state in this article, for which they would not want to admit, understand. They could state that it was a failure of complying with standards and that things weren't properly being maintained. Once again, these are just potential liabilities, especially in a war. The nuclear power plants, if they're not the ones that are going to melt down because they're newer and they're built with those fail-safes in place, you have the issue of the spent fuel rods that cannot keep cool. All the water boils off, and then it's just an irradiated wasteland, especially on the East Coast, the last place you want to be. People throw shade on California. California ain't got nothing on the East Coast when it comes to nuclear power plants and places you don't want to be when the shit hits the fan. As I was saying, Iran is doing some lower level staging here, nothing on the level of Egypt. And you know a country is serious about their military capabilities when they ain't going to the extent of, you know, what Egypt was doing in staging those massive divisions and these very elaborate displays, which must have cost tons of time and manpower and resources to put together. I'm talking, of course, you probably didn't see the video, but it was almost a month ago now that Egypt was staging those 2 divisions of tanks and whatnot outside of the Rafah border crossing in southern Gaza. But you know a country is serious when they don't got time for that, okay? And the Iranian military, they don't got time for that. Part of the problem with invading Yemen is the logistics, okay? Not only would it be very complicated because they're demonstrating they can shoot down drones, right? So can they also shoot down warplanes? Can they even shoot down the stealth F-35 fighters? It's possible, maybe unlikely, some people would say. I'm sure they could do some successful strikes inside Yemen. But again, right when they do that, the price of oil starts to tick upwards. And I'm starting to think that the Iranians, now this would be a masterful chess play, because most people, you know, who are really thinking geopolitically and are not just, you know, like anti everything in the Arab world automatically, which is a good chunk, unfortunately, of the North American population. You know, if it's got Muslim on it or whatever, it's immediate, you know, must be bad, must be evil, global jihad, whatever. And in some cases, that's true. But, you know, it could very well be that Iran and Russia seen a way to occupy the United States and take their attention away from Ukraine on the one hand, and have them to bring all their military power into the Middle East, not to create a war like many of us have been talking about, how the motive is the military-industrial complex and wanting to start a war in the Middle East to profiteer and get a hold of the oil and all that stuff. Maybe. I'm not saying it's not happening. I'm just saying that what if? What if it's actually the Iranians and the Russians, and maybe even the Chinese, who have a hand in this too, who are trying to create this disruption in the Middle East? The Russians love it because that means their stock value goes up in terms of the oil that they can provide. Europe's going to come begging for cheap oil, or they're going to try to get it in some roundabout way in different shipping vessels that, you know, might be unmarked, or in whatever the way they transfer oil from one cargo vessel to the other to avoid sanctions, whatever they do. You know, the Russians stand to benefit a lot from this, multifold. One hand, they get more expensive oil, so they increase their budget, they increase their revenues. On the other hand, it takes attention away from Ukraine, as we've seen. Now, we see Lloyd Austin right now. He's in Ukraine. He's got this big smile on his face, like the biggest smile I've ever seen. And, you know, a lot of people are saying, why do you feel the need to come out and say this now? Some people might say, well, it's obvious because it's clear that support for Ukraine is starting to wane in the West. But is this the same old pitch we hear right before they're getting ready to pull a 180? What have they committed to Ukraine? One more measly HIMARS with a bit more ammunition. Maybe some more ATACMS ammunition. It's possible. They got more ATACMS in there. Some more longer range ATACMS possibly. But still no Taurus missiles from Germany. And they very well could send more weaponry to Ukraine, but they're not for some reason, in spite of the fact that morale is at an all-time low. I mean, it is completely in the pisser on every metric as far as I can see. Even like so many people are starting to speak out now. It's not even, and you know that the shit's hit the fan when it's now okay to say that and not get canceled. I mean, that's the litmus test for, it's not going well for Ukraine, is that you can say that and not get canceled because it's past the point of, being, they can't hide it anymore, right? So anyways, I think that this is another Afghanistan moment. Possibly what the United States would probably like is to get this situation under control in the Middle East and go back into Ukraine and focusing on that situation once again, because inevitably they are going to have to deal with the problem when it's beating down their doorstep in the Baltics, as it already is in Finland. We have these huge convoys or traffic jams on the border because they've closed all the border crossings between Russia and Finland. I believe there's only 1 or 2 open border crossings right now. The same is true in Estonia. And you have a sizable population of Russian speakers in these countries, which some people think is going to be weaponized against in the same way that the Russian-speaking portion of Ukraine was weaponized against Ukraine. And the Baltic states are much smaller. I mean, it would be a walk in the park. If Russia really did want to go in there and take over those countries, they could do it. Seriously, they could probably do it in a few days. Especially now with the, maybe not Finland, okay? Finland's a different story. But the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, I mean, that's, I can't, it won't be a few days, but it won't be nearly as hard as Ukraine. And in terms of the allied countries coming to their aid, I mean, they're separated by the Baltic Sea. They could only ever do so much. So if they wanted to, they could just hop, skip, and a jump, and plus the Baltic states have depleted all of their weapon stocks. They gave them all to Ukraine. So the only thing now they have is the nuclear umbrella. They hope that the United States is not going to abandon them, which any thinking person at this point in time would be saying to themselves, yeah, the United States is most definitely going to abandon your ass when the time comes. Ain't no way they're going to risk nuclear Armageddon for the Baltic states. I mean, they're just going to be like, I guess you could just have that. We'll take whatever on this side of the sea. That's what's going to happen. Poland, okay, you can be the biggest military in Europe if you want, but, that's going to be your problem to deal with in the future. So who knows what's going to happen, guys? But this situation it's crazy. It is absolutely crazy. Mr. Vladimir Putin came out today on BRICS and said a bunch of this and that. People need to understand, a friend of mine told me today, I didn't realize that they have their own Israeli lobby in Russia, their own AIPAC of sorts, which is quite powerful. And you'll notice that Vladimir Putin and his primary media agencies, be they TASS or Russia Today, they're very careful in how they criticize the Israeli government. You really got to watch the wording. They make sure they refer to Hamas as terrorists. I'm not saying they aren't, but if you were an allied nation to to Hamas or to the Palestinian people, then you wouldn't call them that, right? You'd call them resistance fighters or whatever euphemistic term. They don't call them that. There is a sizable Jewish population within Russia, and there's obviously a sizable Russian population that are dual citizens within Israel. So there's a lot of pressure on Vladimir Putin, who refuses to call he refuses to hold Israel to account. Instead, he blames the United States So they always blame the United States when Israel does something, okay? Whereas South Africa, you know, they don't care. They just expel the Israeli ambassador. So you need to understand it's a very tangled web right now in the Middle East. We're starting to see more alignment with the Iranians and the Russians in terms of their military sharing, but we don't know if that's just skin deep, right? We don't know if that's going to be a lasting relationship either. Russia wants the price of oil to go up. Iran stands to benefit, one of the most shuttered, sanctioned countries on earth, who can't sell its oil to anybody, who could probably be one of the wealthiest, would be one of the wealthiest nations on earth were it not for the sanctions. They are being forced to, you know, restricted in their who they can sell oil to, so they stand to benefit from Saudi Arabia's oil fields shutting down. But they also have to worry about their own oil fields getting blown up by Israelis, by the Americans. So I guess it's kind of a double-edged sword, but I still haven't quite figured out how the Russia-Israeli relationship really ties into this, because that's an important one. There's a reason why the Russians have not responded when Israel goes into Syria and does these strikes against the Syrian government. There's a reason. There's a reason why they only utilize their missile defense if they are attacked, okay? And they don't allow Assad to utilize those missile defense when he's being attacked, okay? So there's something going on here, some relationship that is tenuous at best, because indeed a lot of those Jewish people who used to live in Russia have left, okay? They're leaving the country. Of course, there's been those pogroms that recently took place in Chechnya. So we can see the anti-Semitic events increasing. If they were fomented by, you know, if there was some underhanded subversive tactic by the West, who knows? It could be. That's what Russia claimed. But it's hard to say. So anyway, something for you to think about. It's a complicated state of affairs. I most certainly do not have all the answers. Zelensky decided that it was a good time to come clean to the Sun, to say that, yep, we want to kill Vladimir Putin. That's in the cards, because he tried to kill me 5 times, according to Zelensky. I thought it was like 12 times. Wasn't it like last year, 12 assassination attempts? Apparently now it's 5. So Zelensky's in a tough spot, man. You know, he took this gig on thinking, I'm not sure what he was thinking. Maybe he still has his foot in the exit door, ready to leave. A lot of people, you know, it's hard to sympathize with Zelensky, but you can, you know, at times, right? Because you realize this guy's getting played. But, I mean, he brought it on himself. But in saying that you are going to potentially assassinate Vladimir Putin, of course, you have to hope that the Russians aren't taking that literally. Otherwise, that guarantees that the war will never come to an end until one of these guys has been exiled or taken out. So at this point in time, you know, the only thing that's going to stop this conflict is the Ukrainian people themselves. You know, depending on who you listen to, and when you look on the front lines, there most definitely are scenes of dejected and demoralized people on both sides of the fight. There are scenes of Russian soldiers being forced in and being tortured and going to the front lines. Ukrainians committing, you know, taking their own lives on the battlefield when the drone's hovering overhead. On both sides, you see that. So I'm still not convinced that, you know, it's definitely a stalemate, but is it a situation where Russia is bound to win and bound to take over more territory easily? No, I don't think so. I think it's still going to take a long time before we get to that point in time. These are the new Yasin submarines. The Russians are building a fleet of 12 of these submarines, okay? So just think about what the Russians are doing from a nuclear modernization point of view. They're about to do a massive Satan II missile test, which is already on active duty, okay? They're about to do the test now. They're going to be sending it 15,000 kilometers into the southern Pacific. They're going to do that in the next few days. They've busted out the Avant-Garde missile system. They've tested the Skyfall system, which is a nuclear-powered nuclear missile. Yes, you heard correct. One that just flies around for long periods of time. They got the Poseidon nuclear weapon systems. They got the hypersonic missiles, the Zircon and the Kinzhal, which both can be outfitted with nuclear weapons. These guys got, some of the best EMP weapons, weapons that we probably don't even know. Their anti-ballistic missile advantage is far superior to ours. They are ready for nuclear Armageddon in ways that we're 10 years behind at the very least, or at the most. So, at the very least, I should say, because right now we're starting to modernize. They're bringing out the new tactical nuclear bombs that the United States is going to be bringing out. They're going to be modernizing the missile silos pretty soon. They're going to be putting out the new, B-1 Raider bombers or whatever they're called. But there's still a lot of catching up to do. So it doesn't look good. Fires are breaking out in North Carolina. Wildfires. Scenes that, you would think you would see during the summertime, but they're happening right now because the world is most definitely heating up. And I'm not even going to get into that debate with anybody in the comment section. It's heating up, and we'll just see what happens next summer. Let's just wait. If you think that this was a hot summer, just wait, man. Just wait. If you think this was a nasty summer for wildfires, I think that next year in Canada, we could see biblical scale forest fires. We've seen that this year, so biblical isn't even the word. Okay, biblical squared forest fires next year. We had 300% more forest fires than the previous record in Canada. More smoke days than any time in human history, okay, as far as we know, since record keeping began on the North American continent. So next year, because it's really dry right now, and there's still no snow on the ground here, which is very atypical for this time of year, and it's been very warm. So if this trend continues and it remains as dry as it has been, and we're going to be peaking in El Nino next year on top of the already increased temperatures, look out, man. It's going to be a wild, wild year. In Japan, the sirens rang out as a result of North Korea.
And our resolve is stronger than ever.
North Korea's satellite launch.
Hello, I'm Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense. I'm here on the ground.
All right, we got to turn the sound off because Lloyd Austin won't shut up. Anyways, North Korea satellites, if you didn't know, they already have 2 satellites up there orbiting. They pass over the North American continent twice a day, both of them. Some people suspect that they might just be failed satellites. That's why they're not sending signals back. Or it could be because they are, in fact, nuclear contingencies and have nuclear warheads on them to be utilized as an electromagnetic pulse. I believe there was a game in 2010 that predicted this very scenario. They predicted that Hillary Clinton was going to be president, and they predicted that North Korea had launched an EMP over the North Korea unified with South Korea. They became a massive superpower, and that's when they went to war with the United States. I think it was called Homefront. I never actually played the game, but the trailer is it's very, ominous in its prediction, put it that way. This was a ship that some people thought was on fire today in China. It's actually not on fire. They were testing some smoke screening machine that they utilize to prevent, if the ship is going to be attacked. It's a method of concealment. They use this in around the Crimean Bridge as well, to mess with the guidance systems of various munitions. So that's what this was. So it wasn't actually that the ship was on fire. They were just testing out their smoke concealment. China is starting to build up their oil inventories again. That should be a red flag to most thinking people, I should say. I was going to say most people, but most thinking people. In terms of incursions into Taiwanese airspace, you can't read this because it's in Mandarin, but it's basically just a diagram. These diagrams come out every day, and they basically explain the amount of incursions into Taiwanese airspace for which there's been no shortage of in recent days. It's only ramped up. We're talking about hundreds of these incursions per month, which is well above the norm. So that's about what we got to talk about today. I think I went into depth about everything I promised I was going to go into depth about, my friends. Let's hope that this truce, let's try to be optimists. You know me, I'm the eternal pessimist. I'm always going to say that the shit's about to hit the fan because, hey, I'm a prepper. What else do you expect from a prepping channel? But let's hope. Let's hope that, you know, this brief reprieve from fighting is going to create some sort of window. And maybe they'll gauge public sentiment and see what, because Netanyahu is going to do what's politically useful at this point in time. So if it's deemed that people are okay with Hamas continuing to exist, something I can't foresee happening, but it might, a lot of people thought that Vladimir Putin would never allow Ukraine to go on existing, and here we are in a stalemate. Some people thought the other thing, where Ukraine would never allow Russia to maintain a hold on the 4 annexed territories. Now there's apparently pressure to push them into negotiation. So you never know what can happen. But I do know one thing. I think that if the situation in the Middle East starts to resolve itself, which I think is very unlikely at this point, incredibly unlikely, in fact, especially in light of what I told you today, if this is something that's being initiated by the Iranian-backed centralized power structure, then it's very unlikely. But let's just say it is. All that means is they're going to redirect their efforts elsewhere, and they're going to find another war. They're going to go back into Ukraine, and they're going to start stoking that fire once again, or they're going to head over into China. Okay? So just be aware that right now, we're going to take this for what it is, but I'm still very pessimistic as per usual. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Don't forget, you got a couple days left to capitalize on 15% off store-wide at CanadianPreparedness.com. We have our own warehouse. We don't do that drop shipping, get rich quick bullshit. We are grinding day after day to get orders out. The highest quality premium products, from things like Benchmade knives to Heat Hog, personal heating systems, to the best tents that money can buy, from Russian Bear to Norwegian style tents, to just every single thing in one place under one roof. Power Film solar panels, the best foldable military spec solar panels on the market, made in America. You can find it all, CanadianPreparedness.com. Capitalize on that 15%. No bullshit Black Friday offer. Well, the getting is good, because I don't know how much longer I want to do this, guys. I'm getting ready to just want to bug out. I want to bug out into the wilderness and just turn off the screen and, come back in a year with a beard and, maybe even some hair. We'll see if I get lucky in the bush. All right, guys, take care.